But one thing's for sure, certainly the life of the Pope and the Papacy and Christendom as a whole has a major impact on the world. Is it for good? Is it for bad? Or is it simply indifferent?
Shortly after his election, there was all this problem of people, well, even before then, people crossing the Mediterranean to get to Italy and other places from Europe, from Tunisia and Libya and so on and so forth. Welcome them, be united with them if you like, and have something about immigration and how we should deal with people from different cultures, refugees, immigrants of any shape or form.
Yeah, look, I would love to see a Pope that goes even further than Francis, in the sense I'd love to see a Pope whose first action is to travel to Gaza and actually physically spend time with the Church of the Holy Family and other people across the city there. And actually, I think that would make an enormous difference, not just to the people of Gaza, but to the entire world.
Do you think Pope Francis and the church establishment as a whole, the Catholic Church, was able to go far enough in not just dealing with Gaza as a genocide, but of course there's been war upon war, war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, the war in Syria, the war in Libya, endless. I mean, I could go on.
In the Catholic Church, the capital punishment was still accepted. War was, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, was a way. He was more or less indicating, no, that is not the Christian way. Capital punishment is not a solution. The so-called just war needs to be revised. What does it actually mean? Can you have a just war now? I don't think so.
Around even just the issue of Palestine, I think it has been an opportunity for Christian and Muslim people, and to some extent Jewish people as well, to come together for their core beliefs and core values, the dignity of human life, these fundamental things that we all deeply believe in. God willing.
Hello and welcome to this edition of the Deep Dive Perspective. I have an absolutely fascinating program ahead with some really special guests, but our condolences on the death of Pope Francis. Our show today looks at the life, legacy and future, perhaps not only of the papacy, but of Christendom as a whole, in a world which is in flux. Clearly, a faith which certainly the Catholic Church has 1.4 billion following, and of course if you extend it to the rest of Christianity it goes over 2 billion. A faith such as this has a massive influence on the world, and those who are figureheads and leaders of course bear responsibility and are going to be the subject of scrutiny and a lot of criticism and a lot of praise. But one thing's for sure, certainly the life of the Pope and the Papacy and Christendom as a whole has a major impact on the world. Is it for good? Is it for bad? Or is it simply indifferent? We're going to ask all sorts of interesting questions. And with me in the studio, I have Father Daldin John, who's a deacon in the Catholic Church. And I also have Father Dave Smith, who is based out in Sydney, Australia, and is an Anglican for his sins, if I can put it that way. But it's the first time I'm interviewing both the gentlemen, who I hope will give us a really interesting journey into the world of Christendom in the contemporary 21st century context. Do like, share and subscribe to the channel, and we'll be able to put more of these kinds of fascinating programs out, I hope. Well, I'm going to start in the studio with you, Deacon Daldin John. You actually said you're John Luigi as well, which is probably my preferred title for you and your name, but we have several angles we can go at with names of all of us. We all have origins which are very, very multivaried, if you like. If I focus on Christianity's global reality, then Pope Francis, of course, encapsulates that with what he did during his lifetime, the kind of issues he took up, the kind of challenges he faced, the friends he made, the enemies he made, and the legacy that he leaves behind. Give us your overview, first of all, of how you see it.
Well, I think that's interesting. I mean, from the moment he was elected Pope, the first thing he did was choose the name Francis. First Pope to choose the name Francis, and that has implications on its own. But it was his appearance at the palace talking to the crowds, and he just appeared there, and instead of making a big speech, he just said, good afternoon, buonasera, to everybody. And then he was presented with a written speech that he had to deliver, and he looked at it and put it down, and he just spoke from the heart. According to reports, when he went back from the balcony, his guide that was there, his assistant, sort of offered him the papal slippers and the papal robe, and he looked at him straight in the eye and said, "Carnival is over, Monsignor. I don't need, if you like the slippers, you keep them, and the coat, you have it." And that was it. Next morning, they couldn't find him anywhere. He had escaped, as it were, from the Vatican for two reasons. One, he'd gone to pay his bill at Santa Marta, where he'd been staying, because that's it, went to pay his bill. And secondly, he'd gone off to visit some people, and he'd gone off to St. Maria Major and other places about 5 o'clock in the morning, not wearing his papal gear at all. And everybody was frantically looking for him. On the day of his installation as Pope, I think he did a few things that were not within the tradition of the church at the time. One was he reduced the time of the service from being 2 hours or whatever it is to about an hour or something. Cut out a lot of what he considered was superfluous stuff. Suggested that people shouldn't be going around wearing really fancy vestments. And but then on top of that, he invited people of different Christian traditions as well as people of different religions to the service. And immediately after the service, he met a large group of people of different religions in the Clementine Hall and spoke to them. For me, that set the tone of Pope Francis's ministry, if you like. He was going to be open. He wasn't going to be kept in a sort of a mould that popes maybe are expected to be, but be very free and open. He was asked about Francis. Why did he choose Francis? And most people thought, as he was a Jesuit, he probably chose Francis because of Francis Xavier, who was a great missionary Jesuit. And I think people thought that's probably why he's chosen Francis. And he explained very clearly that he chose Francis because he had a great devotion to Francis of Assisi for his openness, his simplicity, his humility, his love of creation, and that was the focus he wanted to build on. Shortly after his election, there was all this problem of people, well, even before then, people crossing the Mediterranean to get to Italy and other places in Europe from Tunisia and Libya and so on and so forth. And one of the first things he did was fly over to Lampedusa to meet people who are coming over from Libya, welcome them, be united with them, if you like, and have something about immigration generally and how we should deal with people from different cultures, refugees, immigrants of any shape or form. Not long after that, well, some time after that, he also went over to Lesbos. Same sort of thing. People were coming over from Turkey to Lesbos, and he went over there. And he said that he would take people back to Rome with them and offer them accommodation and maybe find them work and something like that. And of course, the people over in Lesbos had arranged, trying to arrange to get a load of Christians to come over that had fled. And, well, they hadn't organised it all. So he said, I'll just take whoever's there. And I think he took half a dozen Muslim families back. The interesting thing also about that is when he was elected Pope, again the next day or the day after, he was taken to the Vatican Palace, and he looked at the and he said, well, this is lovely, and who's this for? This is for you, Your Holiness, this is your residence. He said, I could house 100 families in here. I'm not staying here, thank you very much. I'll stay where I've been staying when I came here in Casa Santa Marta. Use this for some other purpose. I'm not staying here. So he refused to stay in the Vatican Palace, or even the palace that is kept for him at the summer residence at Castel Gandolfo. Two reasons for that. One, because Pope Benedict, who'd resigned, was actually using that as his accommodation. And secondly, he didn't really want to have any of those papal trappings.
Well, he's the first pope since 1903 to be buried outside the Vatican as well, which seems to be a consistent trend that he started, as you say, right at the beginning of his term in office, and he seems to have concluded it by rejecting that kind of that ostentation. Of course, we do see people, as you noted when you came in the studio, that the not necessarily Christian fraternity, the leaders, the world leaders that have turned up, have also been turning up in pomp and also getting their public relations exercise done. Although many of them, like Donald Trump, for instance, were extremely unhappy with him, evidently. But at the same time, we get lots of right-wing, well, not right-wing, far-right, or I'd say people who are MAGA oriented, Make America Great types in the States, going online and really presenting a lot of counter narratives about the Pope, almost painting him as a communist, as a sort of a woke. A friend of the woke fraternity, somebody who's destroyed tradition and did nothing for the Catholic values, the ethos of virtue ethics and family traditions, etc. So he's also made an awful lot of enemies, quite clearly. And I'll come into unpacking some of that. But you've raised interesting issues. St. Francis Assisi had very good relations with the Muslim world of his time and went there and did all sorts of diplomacy work. He was great with animals and the ecology as well, as you rightly say. And he was very much about the poor, and his life is very ascetic in that sense. So I remember very early on, one of the first symbolic acts that Pope Francis did was he washed the feet of some ordinary folk, I think, even they may have been immigrants, even, I'm not sure. But that was very, very, very symbolic of, and sort of echoes a lot of what you've said in the list. But let's unpack some of these other issues as well as we go along. And I've got online with us, we're very grateful for Father Dave Smith out of Sydney, who is a fascinating character. Welcome to the show, Father Dave.
Thank you, brother. Great to be with you.
Yeah, I'm sorry you can't see us, but we can see you. But I'd like your take, first of all, on the Pope. As an Anglican who's got a real justice orientation, has worked out in Syria with the people there, the people who were suffering for many, many years, and somebody who's not scared of telling truths and realities. Of course, there is an allegation against formal institutions like the Church, like even perhaps the Mufti of Al-Azhar, or for that matter, the Dalai Lama, that they often pull away from dealing with the actual realities of politics and the world today, that often they don't go far enough in standing up for the poor, the oppressed, and standing up against tyrants. What's your take, first of all, on this papacy, or certainly this term in office, in terms of their track record on dealing with these really big issues that have obviously been happening, the forever wars that have seemed to have been triggered by certainly the US empire, etc., and many, many other issues. We've faced many things like COVID-19 and the health crisis. We've faced issues, I guess, like ecology and the whole push on climate change. Many, many controversial issues, which are the mainstream has a particular take, and Pope Francis had a take on them. What's your vision or view of what this Pope actually achieved? What's his legacy?
Yeah, look, I see Francis as having been a real gift to the world and to the church. I'm not saying I aligned with every position he took, but I think the starting point, as you say, that he took the name Francis after Francis of Assisi. I remember G.K. Chesterton referred to the original St. Francis as history's only Christian, and I think there's truth in that. And you mentioned him too, as a diplomat to the Islamic world. Francis, though I think he tried to convert Salah ad-Din. Though some think he had a death wish going out to visit Salah ad-Din, but Salah ad-Din liked him, if I remember too. So yes, there was that connection with the Muslim world, but moreover, there was just that enormous humility about the Francis of Assisi that I think was really mirrored in the life of Pope Francis. I think that's what really came through. Whether he agreed with everything he said or whether with every decision he made, I think his humility and his love was transparent. And of course, the apostles say, love covers a multitude of sins. And, so I'm left with nothing but admiration for the man, and particularly for the image of him in his closing days, maintaining phone contact with that little community in Gaza, the Church of the Holy Family there, the way he continued to night after night, even from his deathbed, maintain that contact with the men, women and children of that little community in Gaza, trying to give them hope, I think is a beautiful image of what a pope, what a Christian leader should be, very much in the spirit of St. Francis, very much in the spirit of Jesus.
What about that, Dave? You raised this issue of Gaza, and it is probably the fundamental challenge of ethical and moral stands of the day. Of course, the ICJ is now saying that it's pretty much a genocide, but it's not actually gone ahead and formalized that, or I think they've certainly ushered in Benjamin Netanyahu. But the relationship between Pope Francis and the Zionist Jewish community, I'm going to make a distinction because there are many different denominations and not all
Absolutely.
Jews are the same. But Pope Francis would have had to deal with Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel, because, of course, the heart of Christianity is in Jerusalem and Bethlehem as well. And yet what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing the Christian communities in that part of the world say is that perhaps there should be a more unequivocal condemnation of what Israel has been doing. Did you think that Pope Francis went far enough in that regard?
No, many of us really felt he should have gone to Gaza some time ago and stood there with the people. And I suspect that largely he would have liked to have done that. He did, raise questions about whether what Israel was doing constituted a genocide, but one would think that was hardly going far enough. Even so, I recognise that the Catholic Church is a huge institution, and they say changing the direction of the ship of state, it doesn't turn quickly, and he was under enormous criticism even for the moves that he made. So yes, there are any number of people like myself who would have liked to have seen him go a lot further. But, I think the reaction of the Israeli government to his death is indicative of the influence he had. Not only, as I understand it, have they not offered any official condolences, but they ordered that some Twitter posts offering condolences be taken down. I've read a number of reports on that have said that the Israeli government is very explicitly not mourning the death of St. Francis. If I'm incorrect about that, please do correct me, but it seems that at an official level, they've recognised he was no friend of the current government and the war on Gaza. And yes, he could have gone further, but he went far enough to get the ire of his opponents there, and I think to stir up a lot of opposition within his own ranks.
Thank you for that. And back in the studio, of course, Deacon John, we're at the stage where, of course, we have to ask this question, because when what is essentially a genocide is going on, and Christianity being I think probably the most prominent faith which talks about peace and love. It's labelled, I mean, it has that stereotype and label to the point where perhaps some people would say, you know, turning the other cheek is almost tantamount to collaboration with tyranny. But do you think Pope Francis and the church establishment as a whole, the Catholic Church, was able to go far enough in not just dealing with Gaza as a genocide, but of course there's been war upon war, war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, the war in Syria, the war in Libya, endless. I mean, I could go on, the war on Yemen. And all of these have roots, arguably, in lands which are ostensibly Christian. You know, America, the US being the primary one, but then, you know, other Western European Christian nations involved. The argument I know is that in Britain, for instance, we have 70% of people who now say they're not even Christian. It's no longer necessarily a Christian nation, although it's still the institutions, the establishment, the monarchy gives a role to Christianity in a very, very prominent way in Parliament as well, in the House of Lords. But there's this kind of feeling that Western leaders who still robe themselves in the mantle of Christianity when it suits them are actually at the head of most of the terrorism and the killing that's going on around the world. They point the finger at the Muslim world and the Islamic world, but there are time and time again revelations about how even the likes of ISIS and the likes of Al-Qaeda and other such terrorist organizations, which was directly backed, funded, sponsored and initiated by the US empire, which essentially is still seen as a Christian one, certainly in the Muslim world. So there's this notion of the Crusades being revived in those lands, and the suffering are not only the Muslims, they're also the Christians of those lands. Again, in that situation, Pope Francis, as Father Dave put it, must have been in a very difficult situation to go all the way where he, in the spirit of St. Francis Assisi, might have wanted to go, perhaps, in terms of really challenging power and taking on these kinds of establishments.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's fair to say that Pope Francis every Sunday, every week, every Wednesday would have a general audience, and every Sunday he would appear in the square to talk to people at the so-called Angelus prayer at midday. And on every single occasion, he would mention, in a way that the news doesn't, mention wars and troubles in different parts of the world. And Congo, Myanmar, he always prayed for the Rohingyas and their suffering. And generally, he expressed it. So to a certain extent, it's up to the media to take that on and say what he had to say. But whatever the media does, it never really referred to these particular things. His dealings with the other issues, I think the way he dealt with things by, for instance, going along to seeing the signing a declaration with al-Assad on human fraternity, and then going to see Sistani in Iraq. I think his visit to Sistani in Iraq spoke volumes about his position in the Middle East and how he felt about the situation in the Middle East. As Father Dave has just said, from his deathbed, he was calling Gaza to see how things were going on there. And, you know, the Holy Family Church in Gaza wasn't just accommodating other Christians, but anybody who needed that they could assist. You know, and plenty of Muslims and even Christians got shot coming out of the church on occasion, unarmed, but they were shot because they were, you know, threats. So in inverted commas.
I'll just put an explainer that Ayatollah Sistani is the head of the Shia Muslim theological fraternity. Ayatollah Khamenei, of course, is the leader of the largest Shia Muslim state, but Ayatollah Sistani is actually the most senior scholar and theologian and if you like, the spiritual lead. And so it was significant that these two great men in a way had met, and it wouldn't have been very comfortable, I guess, for those people who don't like that kind of what I would describe as quite revolutionary Islamic liberation theology fraternity. And of course, Christian liberation theology in South America is very strong. The Pope had a very strong relationship with that fraternity. So there is a crossover of revolutionary resistance orientation within this particular religious fraternity, or and those who are fighting tyranny. I get that. I see that. Is it that the church itself, the institution of the church, the Catholic Church, first of all, and then, of course, I could talk about the situation of the Church of England and Nicholas Welby, etc. That's a different scenario. But is it very difficult for the Catholic Church to take even more, I guess, forthright stance politically? I mean, is there a separation of politics and religion?
I have to interrupt you there, because what Father Dave said first about the Anglican Church and diocese, that was also something else that Francis said quite clearly to the Catholic Church. He sort of said, don't keep coming back to me for decisions. You need to make your own decisions in your own diocese.
Right.
You have the authority to do that. Don't come back to me. There may be certain issues where you might want my advice, but you do it yourself. And I would say that, I mean, I don't know about all dioceses, probably the same as Father Dave's situation about in the Australian situation. Many of the dioceses I'm involved with here in England and I come in contact with have condemned what's been happening in Gaza and what's happening in Ukraine and in various other places regularly, and not only just condemning it, but actually having times of coming together and praying about the situation on the basis that, whether one believes it or not, that prayer will make a difference. And I think, millions of people praying together probably do make a difference. Pope Francis encouraged the Catholic Church to pray for peace, to pray for reconciliation, to pray for harmony, not just amongst people, but also with creation. And some of his publications would indicate that with Fratelli Tutti and Laudato Si and Laudate Deum and so on. That's his encouragement. It's up to people to take that on board or not. People are going to judge and criticize them. Those who are anti-climate change syndrome and everything else will probably attack it. But I think he was right to phrase his views quite clearly in those documents, saying that we need to change our ways in terms of climate. We need to change our ways in terms of how we relate with people. In the Catholic Church, the capital punishment was still accepted. War was, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, was a way. He was more or less indicating, no, that is not the Christian way. Capital punishment is not a solution. The so-called just war needs to be revised. What does it actually mean? Can you have a just war now? I don't think so. So don't talk about a just war. All these things he has expressed. Now, obviously, a hell of a lot of people are not going to particularly like his stance. Trump didn't like his stance when he talked about we don't need walls, we need bridges, rather than, putting up walls to stop the immigrants coming in, but bridges to actually facilitate and negotiate and understand. Well, I think, as Father Dave said, whatever you do, somebody's going to attack you.
Well, really fascinating. Things are really interesting in this field. Father Dave, Christian Zionism would disagree with the Pope when he was talking about walls and bridges. Christian Zionism rather likes the idea of walls, it seems, but they also liked the idea of genocide in Gaza and beyond, and perhaps other wars. There is, of course, not just one kind of Christianity. There are many factors, and many are politicized, weapons, if you like, for certain politicians that are used. We see it in the Hindutva movement. We see it in the Muslim Takfiri movement, for instance. We see it in the Buddhist movement in Myanmar. Religion can be used as a tool for evil and oppression, undoubtedly, and no matter which religion it is. But in the case of Christianity, and certainly the Christianity that's emanating from America and its impact on the world, do you think there's something that the Catholic Church or the mainstream Anglican Church should be doing which highlights some of these kinds of aberrations? Because the Muslims were put on the spot. We were, I guess, often told to turn up and condemn ISIS, condemn all the Al-Qaedas of the world. Is there a strong enough condemnation of Christian extremism? Can I put it that way? Or, for that matter, Jewish supremacism? Might I even bring that issue into it?
Yeah. Look, if I give you an Australian idiom, we always say out here that no one religion or culture has a monopoly on wankers. There's idiots in every, people who, extremists or whatever you want to call them, but really, people who bring shame on their culture and religion. It's not limited to any one area, is it? Can I go back and just address some of the things you were saying earlier? Because there's a lot of wisdom coming from our brother James there. I just think the original statement you made about the incredible hypocrisy of the Christian world, that it's the countries that proclaim their Christian faith so loudly that have tended to deny it most obviously in their actions, I think was a powerful statement. It needs to be affirmed, I think. And again, I love America in the sense I've been there a number of times. I love the American people, but the truth is American history, for all its statements of faith and trust in God, has the worst history of violence, I think, of any of the world's empires in history. And it's got a terrible history of solving its social problems through violence, whether it be assimilation with its indigenous population or the ending of slavery or foreign policy. There always seems to be this default of solving things through violence, which has been a terrible legacy. And how that's managed to exist alongside such an explicit faith statement from so many Christian leaders is quite incredible, I think. And there's an incredible level of hypocrisy there, at least at a leadership level. I mean, at a grassroots level, I'm sure there, as in this country.
Well, let me throw some. Let's spread it a little further than America itself. Let's take, for instance, Klaus Schwab, who's just stepped down from his leadership of the World Economic Forum. Now, the World Economic Forum and the United Nations, another two very powerful influencer bodies around the world, have committed to all sorts of policies. And on the face of it, they all sound terribly nice, but they are overseeing a very fundamental change in humanity potentially. And again, this is a spiritual and religious question comes in here, because the ethics and the values of religion and prophetic virtues is, I think, definitely something that needs to have an influence on the way humanity is now being shaped. And I'll bring into this, the World Economic Forum, the issues of transhumanism, the idea that Malthusian reduction of populations is there, the notion of climate change rather than actually stopping the destruction of, for instance, the Amazon forests and the deforestation. I don't see emphasis on that kind of climate policy. It's all about changing the weather, it seems, and all sorts of other stuff, or the global warming. So I'm wondering whether there is this kind of political agenda which actually attacks humanity at a fundamental level. I mean, I personally don't want to see a world where the WEF or the corporate powers in the world get to have a bigger slice of the pie of the world than they already do. And we can see the land grabs going on by BlackRock and Bill Gates and various others. I don't necessarily want to see a world in which, population is reduced for the sake of reducing it, because we're told to believe that we can't feed the rest of the planet. So that's actually affecting how families will evolve, whether families exist. I'm not sure about the kind of wokest cultures around equity and equality, the differences that exist within that sort of subtle phenomena. And of course, Pope Francis was pretty strong on a lot of these issues and went with some things which perhaps we would agree with and others we won't. But what's your take, Father Dave, on these kinds of issues? The World Economic Forum's Agenda 2030 and such things, they're global issues, and Christianity must have a stand on them, I guess.
Look, I think it's absolutely fundamental that the church and other religious groups worldwide have a voice in these vital issues that affect the future of humanity. I think it's a question of how we do it. And I think really for me, the core issue is that the church has never worked very well from a position of power. And I think this is the real issue. You know, you go back to Lord Acton's dictum that all power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The church throughout history, I think, has confused political power with charismatic and spiritual power, and it's just become as corrupt as any other institution, and worse in many cases. If you go back to the Torah, I think that gives us an interesting model of leadership. They had a vision of prophet, priest, and king, this sort of threefold leadership structure where the king would do the political stuff and he would have the actual political power. And then you'd have the prophet who would come in and critique him. And the prophet often got stoned for his trouble or killed or thrown in a sewer, etc. You read the Torah, you see all these stories. And then you had the priest trying to sort of celebrate and hold the community together. So that the executive power was never put in the hand of the priest or the prophet. Their role was to critique and to give a spiritual input to those in political power. And I think we need to get back to some sort of pattern like that. This is the problem, say, for Francis. We come back, he's leading an extraordinarily powerful institution, and it's very hard to move there because it's a political edifice. The role of playing more of a critical role to the government, of playing a prophetic role, a costly prophetic role at points, I think we need to come from a position of charismatic power, not political power. That's my feeling. I think that's the only way we're going to move forward.
Thank you, Father Dave. Same question to you. I mean, and it's more a question of the future Pope now, because these issues that I've raised are 21st century challenges. Neoliberalism is an ideology which is still very, in that secularist sense, still doesn't want religion to have a place in politics or in power. And I guess the church is a threat in that sense. The Catholic Church, being such a powerful edifice in its own right, has to be regulated and controlled almost by political powers that be. So do you see the future Pope having even more pressure than, say, Pope Francis had in terms of, buckling to the power of neoliberal, secular, I wouldn't call it atheism, I would just call it neoliberal, secular, powerful corporate elites?
It's an easy and a difficult question at the same time. I think a couple of things that came to mind was John Paul I was the first Pope to refuse to take the crown as head of state. Francis, when he became Pope, made it very clear, I am the Bishop of Rome. I'm not the Bishop of anywhere else. I'm the Bishop of Rome, and that's where my place is. If people want to refer things to me, that's fine, but I'm the Bishop of Rome. End of story. Now, he's then been invested with this global power. He also said, I'm not going to do the John Paul II bit and address Happy Easter in 25 different languages. I'll stick to one. People can translate it. But it's the way people react to it. You mentioned liberation theology before. Liberation theology was very critical of governments and institutions and almost, if you like, taking up arms against them to overthrow them because they were dictatorships and so on and so forth. And other places have tried to work with whatever political power there is. And all I can sort of say in answer to that is the question that was addressed to Peter and others and Thomas More and Thomas Aquinas and various other people, which has sort of said, I respond to God, not to the king. So God is far more powerful than you are, and that's where my allegiance is. I do the will of God, not the will of the king. Yeah. And on that basis, I think there is the essence of what the church is about. It's not there to change things directly, maybe change things by witness, by the way it operates, by expressing its views and hoping other people will follow suit, perhaps. But it knows damn well that it's going to be persecuted and persecuted and persecuted, because it will always, on the whole, I think, be against the people in power who want to run things in a particular way, whether it's grabbing land or just having the power, and the church is not in that favour. On a practical level, in terms of the whole climate change thing, I think most dioceses, at least in Britain, have Catholic and Anglican in particular have already taken on a green church syndrome, which is to sort of cut away from fossil fuels and everything else and go very much towards a different type of technology. It may be just a drop in the ocean, but as Mother Teresa once said, the little drop in the ocean that I do, if that drop wasn't in the ocean, the ocean would be less valid. So we can only do our little bit. And I think that all faith leaders, faiths of different things, can only really live according to what they believe in and how they want to act. And I think if more and more people actually Christians stuck to the gospel rather than the teachings of this person or that person, but stuck to the gospel message, which you mentioned, of love, reconciliation, compassion, understanding, there may be a new heaven and a new earth. I don't know. We can only play our part.
Well, the Jesus of the Garden of Gethsemane, when he says, "Give me a sword," when the Romans are attacking his companions, etc., or the Jesus who goes into the the temple, and turns over the moneylenders' table, is a different Jesus from the one that generally is acceptable to secular neoliberal, fraternity. They, I think, clearly would like a church which does turn the other cheek and has just soft love, compassion, and kindness. The other form, the revolutionary, the resistance oriented, the one that, as Father Dave talked about, that challenges power and says the hard things that are necessary. I think the people arguably really need that right now, because the politicians seem to be failing to do that. The likes of Starmer or Donald Trump, they're very much conforming with the corporate power, conforming with the agendas which very, very rich elitists want. So do you think there's any chance that over the next term of the next Pope that we would see an even more kind of strident Catholic church?
I mean, take again what Father Dave was talking about in the Torah and the breakup there. I think we need prophets. We lack prophets in our society. They seem to have disappeared. We just got the hierarchy and the power and the structures, but we don't have many prophets. There are a few prophets around, which on the whole are not heard, or they're heard by a few people. And now I'm sure there are prophets in most religious traditions anyway. I mean, I've heard some wonderful Hindu gurus talking about soil and what we're doing to each other. Powerful words, but who, apart from the Hindus, have heard it? And I think the same thing applies to us. Apart from the Christians who hear the Pope speaking regularly, who else hears it? So yes, I think we need a prophetic voice. Well, not a prophetic voice, but probably many prophetic voices to sort of touch the hearts of people generally. This new Pope, I haven't a clue. Will it be, I mean, if you've watched the film Conclave at all, which was quite interesting, in fact, film that came out just before a conclave was going to take place. It was pretty down to earth and pretty realistic in many ways. But yes, will it be the factions who would like to throw away everything Francis has done and elect somebody who will turn the clock back, as it were? Or will they elect somebody very much in the mould of Francis, or even, should we say, more extreme than Francis? I really don't know. I mean, people are already taking bets on different candidates, and, we shall wait and see. I'm hoping, obviously, that it may well be Francis II who is elected, who will take Francis's what he's been trying to do and take it further. That's what I would like to see. But we shall wait and see.
Well, it's a fascinating. We've got about 5 minutes left, so you're going to get a chance to have a couple of conclusive thoughts before the end of the show. But I'll start with you, Father Dave, looking into your crystal ball and asking that question again. What would you like to see a new Pope do? Where do you want to see the emphasis and the if you like the steer for the Catholic Church and perhaps the non-Catholic churches?
Yeah, look, I would love to see a pope that goes even further than Francis in the sense I'd love to see a pope whose first action is to travel to Gaza and actually physically spend time with the Church of the Holy Family and other people across the city there. And actually, I think that would make an enormous difference, not just to the people of Gaza, but to the entire world. So, is that possible? Is there someone with the spiritual strength to do that? It may cost them a lot of uh, political power, I think, and influence if they did that. But I think that's exactly the sort of sacrifice we as a church as a whole need to make. We need to step down from the pulpit and from our positions of power generally and get down there with the people where Jesus was and where Jesus is, I believe.
Well, there is in all faiths, and I know it from the Muslim faith because I understand that probably best. There was once a notion of, for instance, even within the Shia fraternity, of red flag Shiism and black flag Shiism. One was a revolutionary Shiism, which looked for revolution and went all the way. The black flag Shiism just simply cried and did mourning and remembered the past and practiced the rituals and was compliant with the faith, but it didn't go to the stage where it was going to fight for the oppressed and go to the next level. In that sense, there's also a prediction. There's an eschatological overlap between Christians and Muslims especially, and given the West Asian arena is the most dangerous and most likely to cause nuclear war, world war and a collapse. It's interesting to analyse those. I think there's Sheikh Imran Hussein is very strong on this stuff from the Sunni fraternity as well. But the eschatology says that Christians, end of times, Christians and Muslims will come together. The people of Rome will come together with the Muslims, and Jesus Christ, the Messiah, will return along with Al-Mahdi, the son of Muhammad, peace be upon him, and they will unite to defeat Dajjal, the one-eyed, evil, satanic agent in the world. Whether that's a system, whether it's an individual, we don't know. But it's interesting that the Muslim eschatology says actually Christians and Romans will unite. I'm not going to talk about Jews. I'm sure the Jews also, all those who are good and who are believers, will unite to stand up. And then we'll have this period of a kingdom of peace and tranquility and real justice on this planet. It's a vision which I rather like, to be honest. But your take in terms of how... sorry, Dave, you can have a little go at that one. What do you think?
I have so many of my Shia friends saying, you think Jesus will be back soon? And I say, I don't know. He says, you think Imam Mahdi will be there with him? I say, I'm not sure. But it's a beautiful vision.
Yeah, it's a beautiful vision. It's a great vision.
People of faith coming together.
Yeah,
and I think we've seen that, around even just the issue of Palestine. I think it has been an opportunity for Christian and Muslim people, and to some extent Jewish people as well, to come together for their core beliefs and core values, the dignity of human life, these fundamental things that we all deeply believe in. God willing, Jesus and Al-Mahdi will come back soon, and God willing, we will see justice, inshallah.
Well, final word goes to you, Deacon Del.
Well, I quite like the idea that a lot of Muslims that I know would turn around and sort of say exactly what you were saying before. The only difference will be is that we'll all be praying like Muslims, but we'll be united with under the leadership of Jesus Christ, as it were. Yeah. I quite like the idea of that. But how do I see things? Coming back to Dave, there is a cardinal who is from exactly that area, and he's sort of in the running as a potential pope. And as he actually already lives there, he may decide to go back there and take his papacy from there. So we don't know. Yes, that would be a great thing. I don't know. It's an extremely difficult thing because my contact with the Palestine people is, I'm a member of the Focolari movement, and we do have Focolaris in Palestine, in Jerusalem, in various other places, and the relationship between Christians and Muslims and Jews is pretty good, as it used to be, as it has been for many years. So I do have a certain hope of a new heaven and a new earth, if you like. How it will come about, I'm not sure. I was interested about your black and red whatnot.
Flags, yes.
We have that in the thing, except that maybe sometimes I don't like the extremism bit. I mean, in a way, I'm an extremist because I like to try and live according to the gospel and see in my neighbour somebody that I love and respect, and as a brother or a sister, as a member of the human family, irrespective of their religion, culture, or whatever background. And I think, the more we try to live by that, by having those personal relationships with people, I know they're small, but they can be catchy, if you like. People will sort of say, well, what makes him do that, or what makes that person do that? I like that. Let's also do it. I don't know. I don't think we're going to change the world overnight. It would take time. We can only play our own small part.
Well, thank you very much, Deacon Daljohn, and thank you very much, Father Dave Thomas out in Sydney, and a fantastic discussion. And I think there is ultimately any decent, civilized human being, be they a believer in God or not, be they a Christian, whatever, there is common ground, undoubtedly. And I always say the common ground does seem to be virtue ethics of prophets. And we talked about prophets being required in this time. Well, if it's not prophets, maybe we ourselves could become like prophets, become closer to that prophetic virtue ethics and tradition. There's no difference between the prophetic virtue ethics of Abraham and Christ and Muhammad. When you go down into the depth of it, this is the reality. There's also a huge esoteric, metaphysical world within religion, both Christianity, Islam and others, which is often left totally unexplored, and that's exploited quite often, I think, by those who have ill intentions towards religion, fearing its power, fearing the political power that it might have, and they tend to then use all sorts of allegations. For instance, the Pope and the Papacy's and Christendom generally has been attacked by notions of paedophilia, for instance. Let's just take one really contentious example. Well, all institutions have some degree of bad eggs that emerge in them. There's no faith institution that doesn't have those. There's no secular institution which is devoid of evil people at some stage. So why not the criticism within secular, liberal or neoliberal institutions and establishments, to the point that, say, the church has been singled out, or for that matter, Islam and Muslims are singled out every day in stereotypes, negative stereotypes, usually perpetrated by the same secular neoliberal media, which is controlled again by the same powerful money mafia elites, as far as I'm concerned. So there are lots of questions for those who point to religion as being a problem, because there's that subliminal message also given that the church is only capable of crusades and Islam is only capable of jihads, and everything that comes from these religions is violent and dangerous and oppressive and backward and non-progressive. Personally, I don't think that could be further from the truth from those people who are true believers within all these faiths, who really adhere to the prophetic virtue ethics and message. And maybe that's what the non-believer fraternity need to get more acquainted with, is prophetic virtue ethics, and to see how that might be the solution for bringing us all together, because it could well be far more than what we've seen, I think, personally, within what neoliberal secularism has offered us since the Enlightenment and since the rise, of course, also of atheism. Controversial, and maybe we'll have another program with atheists on board as well, and neoliberals and secularists come to argue their point. But certainly I've thoroughly enjoyed today's conversation. I wish the church establishment well. I wish for a pope which is in the image of my guests' vision today, certainly, and certainly Islam and Muslims and good religious faith-orientated people around the world would welcome such a pope, would welcome such a church, and would join together with it in opposing tyranny. I think that's the need of our time, is to stand up against tyranny of all kinds, whether it's in the home or up in political echelons of power. We all need to stand for the oppressed against the oppressor. This is our commonality. Thank you for watching this edition of the Deep Dive Perspective, and thank you. If you really liked what you saw, then show us your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing to the channel, so that we can bring you even more fantastic insights into the world as we see it and know it. And once again, thank you to my guests. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Goodbye.